The day Duchess Isabella was sentenced to marry a 60-year-old duke, the entire kingdom celebrated her downfall. Once the most admired noblewoman in the realm, she had everything: beauty, status, and the promise of a brilliant future. Then she made one fatal mistake. She told the truth. After exposing a secret the crown prince would kill to protect, Isabella was stripped of her family's power and publicly humiliated before the royal court. But the king wasn't satisfied. As punishment, he ordered her to marry Duke Aldrich, the aging widower feared throughout the kingdom. A man twice her age, a man rumored to be ruthless, a man many believed had buried more enemies than friends. The nobles laughed, the ladies whispered. Even her own relatives pitied her. Everyone believed her life was over. Yet on the night of the wedding, something happened that no one could have imagined. The old duke looked into her tear-filled eyes and made a promise that would change both their lives forever. A promise so shocking that years later, people would still speak of it. Because the marriage meant to destroy Duchess Isabella, would expose a conspiracy at the heart of the throne, bring a kingdom to its knees, and uncover a secret that had been buried for more than 60 years. And before it was over, the young duchess forced to marry an old duke would become the most powerful woman in the realm. But first, she would have to discover who her husband truly was, and why the king feared him more than anyone else. This is the story of a marriage that began as a punishment and ended with a kingdom in shock. If you love stories where the forgotten rise, villains get what they deserve, and true love appears when it's least expected, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing family. One simple click helps us continue creating these powerful stories for you. Now settle in, because today's story begins with a punishment that was meant to destroy a young duchess, but ended up shaking an entire kingdom. The wedding was the grandest event the kingdom had seen in years. Golden banners hung from every tower of the royal palace. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the great cathedral. Nobles traveled from distant provinces. Merchants closed their shops. Citizens crowded the streets. To anyone watching from afar, it looked like a celebration worthy of a prince and princess. But no one had come to celebrate. They had come to witness a punishment. They had come to watch Duchess Isabella's downfall. Only a year earlier, Isabella had been the brightest star of the royal court. She was admired throughout the kingdom for her intelligence, beauty, and grace. Young noblemen competed for her attention. Ladies copied her fashion. Even foreign ambassadors praised her charm. At 23 years old, she possessed everything a noblewoman could dream of: a powerful family, a respected title, a promising future. Many believed she would one day marry into the royal family itself. But fortunes can change quickly in a kingdom ruled by powerful men, especially when those men fear the truth. Months earlier, Isabella had uncovered evidence of corruption involving the crown prince. She had discovered records proving that royal funds intended for starving villages had disappeared. Thousands of gold coins had vanished. Children had gone hungry. Families had suffered. And while the people struggled, the crown prince continued living in luxury. Most nobles would have remained silent. Most would have protected themselves. But Isabella had been raised to believe that honor mattered more than comfort. So she spoke. She presented her findings before the royal court. She believed justice would prevail. Instead, she learned a painful lesson. Truth was dangerous, especially when it threatened powerful people. The crown prince denied everything. The king defended his son. The evidence mysteriously disappeared. Witnesses suddenly changed their stories. And within days, Isabella found herself transformed from respected duchess to public enemy. Her family lost influence. Her allies abandoned her. Friends who once praised her crossed the street to avoid speaking with her. The royal court turned its back. The punishment came swiftly. The king announced that Isabella would be married immediately, not to a handsome young lord, not to a respected nobleman, but to Duke Aldrich, the Iron Duke, a 60-year-old widower feared throughout the kingdom. The announcement shocked everyone. Whispers spread across every noble house. Some called it cruel. Others called it deserved. Most simply laughed. Now, standing before the altar, Isabella felt those laughs surrounding her. The cathedral was filled beyond capacity. Rows upon rows of nobles watched her with eager eyes. Not because they wished her happiness, because they wanted to see her suffer. The magnificent wedding gown she wore felt heavier than armor. Each step toward the altar seemed impossible. Her hands trembled beneath her gloves. Her chest tightened with humiliation. This was not how she had imagined her wedding day. As a little girl, she had dreamed of marrying for love. She had imagined laughter, music, hope. A future shared with someone who understood her. Instead, she was being handed over like property, a warning to anyone who dared challenge the throne. As she reached the front of the cathedral, she finally looked at the man she was about to marry. Duke Aldrich stood motionless, tall despite his age, broad-shouldered. His silver hair framed a face marked by time and experience. Deep lines surrounded his eyes. Scars crossed one side of his jaw. His dark formal uniform displayed decades of military honors. He looked every bit the fearsome noble described in countless rumors. The Iron Duke, a man who had spent years defending the kingdom's borders. A man whose enemies supposedly feared him more than death itself. A man many believed incapable of kindness. Isabella expected him to appear pleased by her humiliation, victorious, proud. Instead, he looked tired. Not physically tired. Something deeper. A sadness lingered in his eyes. A sadness she could not understand. The ceremony began. The royal priest spoke sacred vows. The crowd listened. But Isabella barely heard the words. She felt trapped. Every promise felt like another chain locking into place. Her future was disappearing before her eyes. When the moment arrived for their vows, her voice nearly failed. Yet somehow she managed to speak. Across from her, Aldrich's voice remained steady, calm, respectful. Never once did he squeeze her hand too tightly. Never once did he stare at her possessively. When the ceremony finally ended, applause echoed through the cathedral. But it wasn't joyful applause. It felt cruel, mocking, as if the entire kingdom had gathered to celebrate her defeat. Isabella forced herself to remain composed. She would not cry. Not here. Not in front of people who wanted to see her broken. The royal feast that followed felt endless. Nobles approached their table, offering false congratulations. Some barely concealed their amusement. Others openly mocked her situation. One elderly countess smiled sweetly before saying, "My dear, perhaps marrying an older husband has advantages. At least you won't have to wait long for your inheritance." Several nobles laughed. Isabella lowered her gaze. Humiliation burned through her. Yet before she could respond, a deep voice interrupted. "Countess." The single word came from Aldrich. Nothing more. Yet the room immediately fell silent. The countess paled. For a moment, Isabella saw why people feared the Duke. Not because he shouted. Not because he threatened. But because his presence alone commanded respect. The countess quickly excused herself. The conversation ended. Aldrich returned to his meal without another word. Hours later, the celebration finally concluded. As evening approached, Isabella climbed into the grand carriage that would take her to her new home. The palace slowly disappeared behind them. For the first time all day, silence surrounded her. She stared out the window. Fields stretched across the horizon. The setting sun painted the landscape gold. Normally, she would have admired the beauty. Today, she felt nothing. Across from her sat Duke Aldrich. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It simply existed. After several hours, towering stone walls appeared in the distance. A massive castle emerged from the fading light. Its towers reached toward the sky. Its gates stood open. Hundreds of lanterns illuminated the grounds. This was Ironhold Castle, the seat of Aldrich's power, her new home. Or perhaps her prison. The carriage rolled through the gates. Servants lined the entrance. They bowed respectfully. To Isabella's surprise, none looked amused. None looked pitying. Instead, they appeared genuinely pleased to welcome her. The unexpected kindness made her uneasy. Inside, the castle was magnificent. Warm fireplaces glowed throughout the corridors. Beautiful paintings covered the walls. Fresh flowers decorated the halls. Nothing resembled the cold fortress she had imagined. Still, appearances could be deceiving. Eventually, servants guided them to the private wing. This was the moment Isabella dreaded most. The moment she would be left alone with her husband. Fear settled heavily in her chest. The door closed behind them. Silence filled the room. Aldrich walked toward a nearby desk. For several moments he said nothing. Then he opened a drawer and removed a small silver key. Turning toward Isabella, he held it out. Confused, she accepted it. "What is this?" she asked quietly. "The master key." She frowned. "I don't understand." Aldrich met her eyes. For the first time that day, she saw genuine warmth there. "That key opens every room in this castle." Isabella blinked. "What?" "You are free to go wherever you wish." She stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. Aldrich continued. His words made no sense. This was not how these stories worked. She had prepared herself for cruelty, for arrogance, for control. Instead, she was being offered freedom. Why? "Why would you do that?" she asked. Aldrich studied her for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Because you've already lost enough." The answer struck her harder than any insult could have. Lost enough. No one had acknowledged her pain. Not her family, not her friends, not the royal court. No one except this man she barely knew. The man she had feared. Aldrich stepped back. "There are guest chambers prepared for me." She stared in disbelief. "You aren't staying here." "No, but we're married." "We are? Then why?" His expression softened. "Because marriage should never begin with fear." For a moment, Isabella couldn't speak. Every rumor she had heard suddenly felt uncertain. Every warning seemed questionable. This was not the ruthless monster described by the kingdom. This was a man treating her with more respect than anyone else had shown her in months. Aldrich moved toward the door. Before leaving, he paused. "If you ever wish to leave this estate, simply tell me." She looked up sharply. "You would allow that?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Lady Isabella, I did not marry you to imprison you." Then he left. The door closed quietly behind him. Isabella stood alone in the enormous room. The silver key rested in her hand. For several moments, she simply stared at it. A key. Such a small thing. Yet it represented something she had not expected to receive. Trust. Freedom. Respect. Tears slowly filled her eyes. Not tears of sorrow. Not entirely. For the first time since her punishment began, someone had treated her like a person instead of a political lesson. Someone had offered kindness when she expected cruelty, and strangely enough, that frightened her more than anything else, because kindness forced her to question everything she had been told about Duke Aldrich, everything she believed about her future, everything she thought she understood about the marriage that had been meant to destroy her. Standing alone beneath the glow of candlelight, Isabella looked down at the silver key once more. And for the first time since her wedding had been announced, she wondered if the kingdom had been wrong. Perhaps the greatest danger in Ironhold Castle was not the Duke himself. Perhaps the greatest danger was discovering who he truly was. Weeks turned into months. Winter slowly surrendered to spring. The snow that had blanketed Ironhold Castle melted from the hillsides, revealing vast stretches of green countryside. For the first time since her forced marriage, Isabella found herself breathing easier. Not because her circumstances had changed, but because the man she had feared most had given her something she had not expected: peace. Duke Aldrich never demanded her attention, never questioned her movements, never treated her as property. The silver key he had given her on their wedding night remained exactly what he had promised it would be: a symbol of freedom. And slowly, curiosity began replacing fear. Every morning, Isabella explored another part of the duchy. At first, she did so simply to escape the loneliness of the castle. But before long, she discovered something far more valuable: the truth. The first surprise came in a small farming village called Ashbrook. The village had suffered terrible flooding years earlier. According to the stories Isabella had heard in court, Duke Aldrich had ignored the disaster completely. The crown often described him as selfish and indifferent. Yet when Isabella arrived, she found something entirely different. A sturdy stone bridge stretched across the river. Fresh homes lined the streets. A new grain mill stood near the water. Children played freely in areas once destroyed by floods. Confused, Isabella asked an elderly woman about it. The old woman looked shocked. "You don't know?" "Know what?" The woman pointed toward the bridge. "The Duke built all of this." Isabella blinked. "What do you mean? When the floods came, the crown sent nothing." The woman's eyes darkened. "We begged for help." "What happened?" "Duke Aldrich arrived himself." The old woman smiled softly. "He spent 3 months here." Isabella stared. "He stayed personally." The woman nodded. "He slept in a tent beside the workers. He paid for the rebuilding. Every coin." The Duchess felt her stomach tighten. That was not the story told in the capital. Not even close. The further she traveled, the more examples she discovered. Every village seemed to possess a similar story: a school, a hospital, a repaired road, a rescued family, and every story ended the same way, with Aldrich helping when no one else would. One afternoon, Isabella visited a small school nestled among rolling hills. Children rushed through the courtyard laughing. Inside, she found bright classrooms filled with books. The teacher proudly explained that the school educated children free of charge. "Who pays for it?" Isabella asked. The answer came immediately: the Duke. Again, always the Duke. As she walked through the school, dozens of children surrounded her. One little girl couldn't have been older than 7. She tugged gently on Isabella's sleeve. "Are you really married to Duke Aldrich?" The question made several teachers nervous, but Isabella smiled. "Yes." The little girl grinned. "He's my hero." The word struck Isabella unexpectedly. Hero. No one in the capital had ever used that word for Aldrich. The little girl continued. "When my father got sick, the Duke paid for the healer." Her smile widened. "He saved him." Around them, other children began sharing stories. "He bought my books. He helped our farm. He saved our village during the drought. He paid for my brother's medicine." The voices blended together, story after story. act after act of kindness. By the time Isabella returned to the castle that evening, her thoughts were in complete turmoil. Everything she had believed was beginning to crumble. The monster she had imagined simply did not exist. Weeks later, another discovery changed everything. While visiting a market town, Isabella witnessed a dispute between a wealthy tax collector and a poor farmer. The tax collector was demanding money the farmer clearly did not have. The farmer's wife stood crying beside him. Their children looked terrified. The crowd watched helplessly. Then a familiar voice echoed across the square. "Release him." The tax collector froze. The crowd parted immediately. Duke Aldrich stepped forward. The effect was immediate. Fear appeared on the tax collector's face. Not the fear of a cruel ruler. The fear of someone caught doing something wrong. The Duke examined the records. Only a few moments passed before his expression darkened. "You doubled their taxes." The collector stammered. I was following orders." "No." Aldrich's voice remained calm. "You were stealing." Silence swept across the market. The tax collector's face turned pale. Before anyone could react, Aldrich ordered his guards to arrest him. The crowd erupted into cheers. The farmer dropped to his knees. The Duke immediately helped him stand. "Never kneel to thank someone for justice." Those words remained in Isabella's mind long after they returned home. Justice. The Duke spoke about it often, not as an ideal, as a responsibility. Slowly, she began seeing the man behind the title. A man who noticed suffering others ignored. A man who remembered names. A man who listened. A man who carried burdens without complaint. Yet despite everything she learned, one mystery remained. Why? Why did the kingdom hate him? Why did the crown fear him? Why did the capital tell such different stories? The question haunted her, until one evening, she finally gathered the courage to ask. The opportunity arrived during dinner. A quiet rain tapped gently against the castle windows. Candles flickered across the dining hall. For once, no servants lingered nearby. Only the two of them remained. Aldrich appeared unusually tired. Dark circles rested beneath his eyes. Several unopened letters sat beside his plate. Clearly, something troubled him. Still, Isabella spoke. "My lord?" Aldrich looked up. "Yes?" She hesitated, then decided honesty was best. "May I ask you something?" A faint smile appeared. "You may ask me anything." Her heart pounded. "Why does the kingdom hate you?" The question hung in the air. The smile disappeared. A long silence followed. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. For several moments, Aldrich simply stared into the fire, as though considering whether to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded older than usual, wearier. "Do they hate me?" She frowned. "The capital does." "Ah." Aldrich nodded slowly. "The capital." Again silence. Then he sighed. "Because powerful men fear the truth." The answer was simple, yet it carried enormous weight. Isabella leaned forward. "What truth?" Aldrich's eyes met hers. For the briefest moment, she saw something she had never seen before. Fear. Not fear for himself. Fear of something larger. Something dangerous. Before he could respond, the doors suddenly burst open. Several guards rushed inside. Rainwater dripped from their uniforms. Their expressions were grim. One stepped forward immediately. "My Duke." Aldrich stood. "What happened?" "Riders from the eastern border." The guard swallowed. "They've brought urgent news." A heavy silence settled over the room. Aldrich's face hardened instantly. "Bring them in." Moments later, two exhausted riders entered. Mud covered their clothing. Their horses had clearly been ridden without rest. One dropped to a knee. "My Duke." "Report." The rider's voice shook. The crown prince has begun confiscating estates. Isabella frowned. Confiscating estates. The writer nodded. Several nobles have already disappeared. Aldrich's expression darkened. Names. The writer listed them. Each name belonged to a noble known for criticizing the throne. One after another. All gone. All arrested. All silenced. The room grew colder with every word. Finally, the writer finished. And there is more. Aldrich folded his arms. Speak. The man hesitated. They are asking questions about Ironhold. Every muscle in Aldrich's body tightened. What kind of questions? The writer lowered his voice. They believe something is hidden here. The silence that followed felt suffocating. Isabella looked between them, confusion mixed with dread, because for the first time since arriving at Ironhold, she saw genuine alarm on Aldrich's face. Not panic, not weakness, but concern. The concern of a man who knew exactly what was happening, and exactly how dangerous it was. When the riders were finally dismissed, Isabella remained seated. Neither spoke. Neither spoke. The fire crackled softly. Rain continued falling outside. At last she broke the silence. You knew this would happen. Aldrich didn't deny it. You know why they're coming. Again, no denial. Slowly, he walked toward the window. His shoulders seemed heavier than before, older, as though carrying years of invisible weight. The crown has been searching for something. Isabella's heartbeat quickened. What? Aldrich stared into the darkness beyond the glass. When he finally answered, his voice was barely above a whisper. Proof. The single word sent chills through her. Proof. Proof of what? Corruption? Treason? Murder? She didn't know. But one thing had become painfully clear. The stories surrounding Duke Aldrich were no accident. Someone had spent years turning him into a villain. Someone powerful. Someone terrified of what he knew. The storm arrived just after midnight. Dark clouds swallowed the moon. Thunder rolled across the mountains surrounding Ironhold Castle. Rain hammered against the ancient stone walls. Inside the castle, most servants had already retired for the night. The corridors stood quiet. The great halls sat empty. Only a handful of guards remained awake at their posts. Yet despite the peaceful appearance, something felt wrong. Isabella sensed it long before the attack began. For days, tension had hung over the castle like an invisible shadow. Ever since the riders had arrived with news of the crown prince's actions, Duke Aldrich had become more cautious. Additional guards patrolled the walls. Messengers came and went at all hours. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Something was happening, something dangerous, and everyone seemed to know it except her. Unable to sleep, Isabella stood beside her chamber window. Lightning flashed across the distant hills. For a brief moment, the entire landscape glowed white. Then darkness returned. She wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Her thoughts drifted toward Aldrich. The man she had once feared. The man she now struggled to understand. Every day seemed to reveal another side of him. A new act of kindness. A hidden sacrifice. A quiet burden. The more she learned, the harder it became to reconcile the Duke she knew with the monster described by the kingdom. A loud crack of thunder shook the castle. Then came a sound that didn't belong. A scream. Isabella froze. Another scream followed. Then shouting. The unmistakable sound of steel, clashing against steel. Her blood ran cold. The attack had begun. The chamber door suddenly burst open. A maid rushed inside. Her face was pale with terror. Your Grace, what happened? The castle is under attack. The words struck like lightning. Before Isabella could respond, alarm bells exploded throughout Ironhold. Their deafening echoes filled every corridor. Chaos erupted instantly. Guards raced through the halls. Servants shouted warnings. Doors slammed. Weapons were drawn. The castle transformed into a battlefield within seconds. Isabella hurried into the corridor. Panic surrounded her. Smoke drifted from the lower levels. Somewhere nearby, glass shattered. Then she saw him. Duke Aldrich, fully armed, sword in hand, moving through the chaos with remarkable calm. Despite being 60 years old, he looked every bit the warrior who had defended the kingdom's borders for decades. His commands cut through the confusion. Secure the western gate. Protect the servants. Nobody fights alone. The guards obeyed immediately. Not out of fear, out of trust. Aldrich spotted Isabella instantly. His expression hardened. You should be in your chambers. So should you. A brief smile touched his lips despite the danger. Unfortunately, our guests disagree. Another crash echoed through the castle. This one much closer. The Duke's eyes narrowed. They've breached the eastern wing. His attention shifted toward a group of approaching guards. Take the Duchess to safety. I'm not leaving. Isabella, I am not leaving. For a moment, they stared at one another. Then Aldrich sighed. There was no time to argue. Stay close. The words carried equal parts command and concern. Together they moved deeper into the castle. The sounds of battle grew louder. Bodies lay scattered throughout several corridors. Some belonged to castle guards. Others wore black clothing. Assassins, professional killers, not common criminals, not thieves. These men had come with a specific purpose, and Isabella already knew who that purpose was. Aldrich. The assassins weren't interested in wealth. They weren't attacking random targets. They were hunting the Duke. The realization filled her with dread. Someone powerful wanted him dead. Very powerful. The fighting intensified near the great library. Several assassins emerged from the shadows. Their blades gleamed in the torchlight. Without hesitation, they charged. The battle was brutal. Aldrich moved with astonishing skill. Years of experience guided every movement. Every strike was precise. Every defense efficient. He wasted no energy, no motion, no effort. One assassin fell, then another, and another. Yet more continued appearing. The attackers had planned this carefully. They knew the castle. They knew its defenses. Someone had given them information. Someone from within the kingdom. As the battle raged, Isabella suddenly noticed movement behind Aldrich. An assassin, hidden among the shadows, approaching silently. Blade raised, directly behind him. Aldrich. The warning came too late. The assassin lunged. Without hesitation, Aldrich turned. Instead of dodging, he stepped between Isabella and the attack. The blade struck. Pain flashed across his face. Blood stained his uniform. Time seemed to stop. No! Isabella's scream echoed through the corridor. Rage exploded through the Duke. With a single strike, he disarmed the assassin. Moments later, the attacker lay unconscious. The remaining assassins retreated. Their mission had failed. The castle guards pursued them into the storm. Silence gradually returned, but Isabella barely noticed. Her attention remained fixed on Aldrich. Blood continued flowing from the wound in his side. His face had grown pale, yet his first concern wasn't himself. Are you hurt? The question stunned her. You were stabbed. And you? Tears filled her eyes. No. Relief softened his expression. Only then did he allow himself to collapse. The following hours passed in a blur. Physicians arrived immediately. The wound was serious. Not fatal, but serious. The blade had narrowly missed vital organs. By dawn, the castle had regained some sense of order. The attack was over. The assassins were gone, yet the damage remained. Several guards had died defending Ironhold. Many others were injured. And Aldrich lay unconscious in his chambers. Isabella refused to leave his side. Hour after hour she sat beside his bed, watching, waiting, praying. The realization surprised her. Months earlier she would have felt nothing. Now the thought of losing him terrified her. When evening finally arrived, exhaustion forced her to stand. She needed air, space, time to think. As she wandered through the castle, her thoughts remained fixed on Aldrich. Why had he protected her? Why risk his life? The answer should have been obvious. Because he was her husband. Yet somehow, it felt deeper than that. More personal, more meaningful. Lost in thought, Isabella eventually found herself near an old section of the castle rarely used by servants. A narrow corridor stretched before her. At the end stood a heavy wooden door. Something about it felt familiar. Then she remembered. The silver key. The master key. A staircase descended into darkness. Cold air drifted upward. For a moment, she hesitated. Then curiosity won. Taking a lantern from the wall, she descended. The staircase seemed endless. Deeper and deeper beneath the castle. Finally, she reached the bottom. Another door waited. This one made of iron. Again, the key worked. The door opened slowly, and Isabella stepped inside. Her breath caught immediately. The chamber was enormous, far larger than she expected. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling. Hundreds of boxes filled the room. Stacks of documents occupied every surface. Maps covered the walls. Letters, records, ledgers, journals. Thousands upon thousands of pages. An entire lifetime of secrets. Confused, Isabella approached the nearest table. A single document rested there. Its seal bore the royal crest. Carefully she opened it, and felt her blood run cold. The letter described payments, large payments, money taken from royal funds, money intended for famine relief. Instead, The funds had been transferred into private accounts connected to the crown prince. Isabella frowned. She reached for another document, then another, and another, and another. Each revelation proved worse than the last. Financial records showed decades of theft. Military reports revealed villages abandoned during invasions, despite available resources. Witness statements described innocent nobles falsely accused of treason. Letters connected the crown to mysterious deaths, disappearances, executions, murders. The deeper she looked, the darker the truth became. This wasn't ordinary corruption. This was systematic, deliberate, generational. An entire kingdom had been exploited by those sworn to protect it. Hours passed unnoticed. Isabella continued reading. Piece by piece, the puzzle assembled itself. The king, the crown prince, several powerful nobles, all connected, all guilty. Then she discovered something that shattered her remaining illusions. A thin folder bearing her name. Hands trembling, she opened it. Inside were copies of royal communications, orders, instructions, private correspondence. And there, written clearly in the king's own hand, was the truth. Her punishment had never been about justice. The marriage had never been a sentence. It had been a strategy, a distraction. The crown needed to discredit her before she exposed additional corruption. Marrying her to Aldrich served two purposes. It ruined her reputation and placed her beside the one man gathering evidence against them. The realization left her speechless. Everything had been orchestrated. Everything. Suddenly, she understood. The crown hadn't merely feared her accusations. They feared what she might discover, what she might uncover if she ever learned the truth. And now she had. At the center of the chamber stood a large desk. A single journal rested upon it. The leather cover appeared worn from years of use. Isabella opened it carefully. The handwriting belonged to Aldrich. Page after page detailed his investigation. 20 years. 20 years spent gathering evidence. 20 years risking his life. 20 years protecting witnesses, helping victims, documenting crimes. Not for wealth, not for power, not for revenge, for justice. The realization hit harder than anything she had read. All this time he could have fled, could have remained silent, could have protected himself. Instead, he chose to fight, alone, year after year, carrying a burden no one else understood. Tears filled Isabella's eyes. Not because of the crimes, though they horrified her. Not because of the danger, though it terrified her. She cried because she finally understood Aldrich, the loneliness, the sacrifice, the weight he carried every single day. The kingdom called him a monster, yet he had spent decades protecting the very people who hated him. The kingdom feared him, yet he had risked everything for them. The kingdom mocked him, yet he remained loyal. Even after all they had done, a knock suddenly echoed from the doorway. Startled, Isabella turned. Aldrich stood there, pale, weak, leaning heavily against the wall. For several moments neither spoke. The secret between them lay exposed. Finally, Aldrich broke the silence. "You found it." His voice carried no anger, only resignation. Isabella looked around the chamber, then back at him. "You've been carrying this alone for 20 years. A faint smile appeared. Someone had to. No. Tears slid down her cheeks. No one should have to. Something changed in Aldrich's expression. A barrier slowly began to crumble. The same barrier he had spent decades building around himself. For the first time, Isabella saw the man beneath the title. Not the Iron Duke, not the feared noble. Simply a tired man who had spent 20 years fighting for people who would never know his sacrifice. Without thinking, she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around him. Aldrich froze. Perhaps no one had embraced him in years. perhaps decades. Slowly, carefully, he returned the gesture. Outside, the storm continued raging. Thunder shook the sky. Rain battered the castle. But deep beneath Ironhold, something far more powerful had begun. Trust, understanding, love. And though Isabella did not realize it yet, her heart had already made its choice. Somewhere between the villages he protected, the sacrifices he made, and the wound he suffered while saving her life, she had fallen in love, not with a title, not with a duke, but with the man behind the monster the kingdom had invented. And together, they were about to expose a truth powerful enough to bring an entire kingdom to its knees. The summons arrived 3 days later. It bore the royal seal, heavy crimson wax, stamped with the crown of the kingdom. Every person in Ironhold Castle knew what it meant. The king had made his move. The messenger who delivered it looked terrified, as though even carrying the letter had placed his life at risk. Aldrich accepted the scroll without expression. He already knew what it contained. The king was calling them to the capital. Immediately, officially, it was described as a royal inquiry, an opportunity to answer accusations against the duke, an opportunity to defend his honor. Nobody believed that. Not Aldrich. Not Isabella. Not the guards who stood silently nearby. The palace wasn't summoning them for justice. It was summoning them for execution. The crown knew. Someone had informed them. Somehow, word had reached the capital that Aldrich's secret archive had been discovered. The evidence hidden beneath Ironhold Castle was no longer safe, and now the king needed to act before the truth escaped his control. For a long moment, silence filled Aldrich's study. The letter rested on the desk between them. Neither spoke. Finally, Isabella broke the silence. "We don't have to go." Aldrich looked up. "We do." "They'll kill us. Perhaps." The calmness in his voice made her angry. "How can you say that so easily?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Because I've known this day was coming for 20 years. The word struck her heart. 20 years. 20 years carrying secrets. 20 years waiting for this moment. 20 years preparing to challenge a throne. Aldrich rose slowly from his chair. The wound from the assassination attempt still troubled him, yet his posture remained strong. His eyes remained steady. For the first time, Isabella realized something. The Duke was no longer trying to avoid confrontation. He was preparing for it. "If we don't go," he said quietly, "the crown wins." She stared at him. "And if we do?" Aldrich walked toward the window. Outside, dawn painted the hills gold. "Then the truth finally has a chance." 3 days later, their carriage entered the capital. The city looked exactly as Isabella remembered. Grand, magnificent, deceptive. Thousands filled the streets. Rumors had already spread. Everyone knew the Duke and Duchess had been summoned. Everyone expected a spectacle. Many expected blood. Crowds lined the roads. Whispers followed them everywhere. Some pointed. Others laughed. Many simply watched. The same city that once celebrated Isabella's downfall now watched her return. But this time, she was not alone. Aldrich sat beside her, calm, silent, unshaken, and beneath the carriage floor rested several sealed chests. The evidence. 20 years of secrets. 20 years of proof. 20 years of truth. The palace towers eventually appeared, massive and imposing, symbols of royal power. For years they had seemed untouchable. Today, they looked different. Today, they looked vulnerable. As the carriage rolled through the gates, Isabella felt her pulse quicken. There was no turning back now. Whatever happened next would change the kingdom forever. The royal court gathered at noon. The Hall of Crowns had never held so many people. Nobles filled every seat. Military commanders lined the walls. Foreign ambassadors occupied reserved balconies. Judges, merchants, religious leaders, even common citizens had been granted access. Thousands watched. Thousands waited. At the far end of the chamber sat the king, golden robes draped across his throne. The royal crown glittered beneath crystal chandeliers. To the casual observer, he appeared confident, powerful, untouchable. But Isabella knew better now. Behind the polished image hid a frightened man. A man desperate to protect his secrets. Beside him sat the crown prince, the same man responsible for her downfall, the same man whose corruption had started everything. He wore a smug smile, a smile that made her stomach turn. He believed he had already won. The moment Aldrich and Isabella entered the hall, whispers exploded throughout the room. Every eye followed them. Every gaze lingered. The tension felt unbearable. At last, the royal herald stepped forward. "Hear ye!" His voice thundered through the hall. His Majesty summons Duke Aldrich of Ironhold and Duchess Isabella to answer charges of treason against the crown. The words echoed. Treason. The accusation everyone expected. The king rose dramatically. His performance was flawless. "My loyal subjects," he announced, "I take no pleasure in this matter." A lie. But no man stands above the law. Another lie. He turned toward Aldrich. "You have spread dangerous falsehoods against the crown." A lie again. The king's voice grew louder. "You have gathered enemies of the kingdom." Lie. "You have threatened the stability of the realm." Lie. One lie after another. Yet much of the court nodded along. Years of propaganda had done their work. Many still believed Aldrich was the villain. The king smiled, the smile of a man certain of victory. Then he made his mistake. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" The hall fell silent. Everyone looked toward Aldrich. The Duke slowly stepped forward. For several moments he said nothing. Then he turned toward Isabella. The smallest nod, the slightest gesture, a signal. It was time. Isabella stepped forward, carrying a leather folder. Confusion spread through the room. The king frowned. "What is this?" Isabella met his gaze. "The truth." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across his face. Only for a second. But it was enough. She opened the folder. Then she began reading. The first document seemed harmless. A financial report. Nothing more. Yet as Isabella continued, the room slowly changed. The report showed royal funds disappearing. Large sums. Money allocated for famine relief. Money meant for starving villages. Instead, the funds had entered accounts controlled by the crown prince. Murmurs spread across the hall. The prince's smile faded slightly. Still, the king remained calm. One document meant nothing. Then Isabella produced another, and another, and another. Each piece connected to the last. A pattern emerged. A terrifying pattern. Stolen gold. Fraudulent taxes. Bribed officials. Missing records. Missing witnesses. Missing people. The murmurs grew louder. Nobles exchanged nervous glances. The king shifted uncomfortably. For the first time, cracks appeared in his confidence. Then came the witness statements, signed confessions, official seals, verified records, impossible to dismiss, impossible to explain away. Gasps echoed through the chamber. One noble stood abruptly, then another, and another. Questions erupted. Demands followed. The king's carefully constructed narrative began collapsing. Piece by piece, document by document, truth by truth. An hour passed, then another. Yet Isabella continued. The evidence seemed endless, because it was. 20 years of investigation could not be dismissed in a single speech. Every accusation came with proof. Every crime came with records. Every lie came with witnesses. The deeper she dug, the worse the revelations became. The crown had orchestrated political assassinations. The crown had manipulated elections. The crown had framed innocent nobles. The crown had ordered unlawful executions. The crown had stolen from its own people. Shock transformed into outrage. Outrage transformed into fury. The hall erupted repeatedly. Several nobles openly demanded arrests. Others demanded trials. Some demanded the king's immediate abdication. The atmosphere turned explosive, and still, Isabella wasn't finished. Then she revealed the documents concerning herself. The room became silent once more. Every person listened. Every person watched. The evidence proved beyond doubt that her punishment had been manufactured. The charges had been false. The investigation had been manipulated. The marriage had been politically motivated. The crown had deliberately destroyed her reputation to silence her. Many nobles looked horrified. Others looked ashamed. Some had participated. Many had remained silent. Now they understood. They had helped ruin an innocent woman. The crown prince suddenly stood. Enough. His voice echoed through the hall. This is nonsense. No one responded, because the evidence kept speaking for itself. The prince's face reddened. Panic replaced confidence. Fear replaced arrogance. He looked toward his father. The king offered no help. For the first time, even he appeared overwhelmed. The truth was simply too large, too detailed, too complete. There was no escape. Everything changed when the commander of the royal guard stepped forward. For decades he had served the crown. For decades he had protected the throne. Now he removed his ceremonial sword and placed it on the floor. The gesture stunned everyone, including the king. "Commander?" The king's voice trembled. The old soldier bowed his head. "I cannot defend corruption." The silence that followed felt deafening. Then another officer stepped forward, and another, and another. One by one, members of the royal guard abandoned the throne. Years of loyalty vanished in minutes, because loyalty to a kingdom was not loyalty to corruption. The king watched in horror. His power was evaporating before his eyes, not through violence, through truth. The crown prince finally snapped, his face twisted with rage. Without warning, he rushed toward a side exit. Everyone saw it. The attempted escape, the admission of guilt. The hall erupted. Guards moved instantly. The prince barely reached the doorway before soldiers intercepted him. He fought. He screamed. He demanded obedience. No one listened. Within moments, iron shackles locked around his wrists. The future king of the realm stood arrested. The sight shocked the entire kingdom. The king's collapse followed soon after. His voice weakened. His arguments disappeared. His authority crumbled. Everything that had protected him was gone. His lies exposed. His allies abandoning him. His son imprisoned. His crimes revealed. The throne itself suddenly seemed smaller, less powerful, less permanent. A symbol stripped of its illusion. At last, the high judge rose. The oldest legal authority in the realm. A man respected by every noble house. His voice carried across the hall. Based on the evidence presented, I find sufficient cause to detain the king pending trial. The words struck like thunder. No monarch had ever heard them before. For centuries, kings judged others. Now, a king was being judged. The room exploded. History was unfolding before their eyes. Royal guards approached cautiously. The king did not resist. He simply sat there, broken, defeated, watching 20 years of lies collapse around him. The crown slipped from his head, rolled down the steps, and came to rest on the marble floor. No one moved to retrieve it. Outside, the capital erupted into chaos. News spread faster than wildfire. Crowds filled the streets. Church bells rang. Citizens celebrated. Others wept. Some refused to believe it. The kingdom had changed forever in a single afternoon. The reign of a corrupt king was over. Justice had finally arrived. Yet even as the hall descended into confusion, one elderly voice suddenly rose above the noise. "Wait!" The command echoed through the chamber. Everyone turned. An old royal advisor struggled to his feet. His hair was white. His hands trembled, yet his eyes remained sharp, determined, and filled with secrets. The old man carried a sealed wooden box, one protected by a royal insignia older than the current dynasty. His gaze settled on Aldrich, then on the fallen crown, then back to the court. "The kingdom has heard one truth today." The advisor's voice shook. "But there is another." Silence spread instantly. Every eye fixed upon him. Every breath seemed to stop. The old advisor slowly opened the box. Inside rested a collection of ancient documents. Documents hidden for more than 60 years. Documents capable of changing everything. His trembling fingers lifted the first page. And when he spoke again, the entire kingdom held its breath. Because the greatest secret of all had yet to be revealed. The Hall of Crowns stood frozen in silence. Only moments earlier, the kingdom had witnessed the fall of a king. The crown prince had been arrested. The former king had been stripped of power. 20 years of corruption had been exposed before the eyes of thousands. Yet now, as the elderly royal advisor stepped forward carrying an ancient wooden box, an entirely different tension settled over the room. Something bigger was coming. Something even the Duke seemed unprepared for. The old advisor's hands trembled with age. His face was pale, his breathing uneven. Yet there was determination in his eyes. The determination of a man who had carried a secret for far too long. The fallen king watched him with horror. For the first time that day, genuine fear appeared on his face. Not fear of imprisonment, not fear of disgrace, fear of what the old man might reveal. The advisor slowly approached the center of the hall. Every noble watched. Every soldier listened. Even the citizens crowded into the galleries leaned forward. No one dared speak. The advisor opened the box. Inside rested several yellowed documents, birth records, royal decrees, letters sealed with symbols older than the current monarchy itself. Carefully, he removed the first document. Then he turned toward the court. For 60 years, he said, his voice shaking, I have carried a burden that should never have been mine. The silence deepened. The truth was stolen. His eyes found Aldrich. The rightful heir was stolen. Murmurs spread throughout the hall. Confused whispers echoed everywhere. The advisor raised a trembling hand. The room immediately quieted. Then he spoke the words that would change history. Duke Aldrich is not merely a duke. The crowd stared. The advisor unfolded the ancient birth record. He is the firstborn son of King Cedric. Gasps exploded throughout the chamber. The old man continued. The legitimate heir to the throne. The room erupted. People leapt to their feet. Nobles shouted. Citizens cried out. The revelation struck the kingdom like lightning. Even Isabella felt her breath catch. She turned toward Aldrich. The duke stood perfectly still, his face unreadable, but she could see the shock in his eyes. This was no performance. No carefully planned revelation. He hadn't known. The advisor raised the document higher. These records were hidden shortly after Prince Aldrich's birth. The crowd quieted once more. The child was removed from succession. He pointed toward the fallen king. By his own uncle. The hall exploded again. The former king lowered his head. His silence confirmed everything. The advisor continued. The kingdom was told the infant prince had died. Another gasp. But he survived. The old man's voice broke, and he spent his entire life unaware that the throne belonged to him. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The implications were overwhelming. The man they had mocked, the man they had feared, the man they had called the Iron Duke, had been the rightful king all along. One by one, nobles began dropping to their knees. The movement spread rapidly throughout the chamber, like falling dominoes. Lords, ladies, generals, governors, judges, thousands bowed before Aldrich, not because of fear, not because of obligation, because the truth had finally been revealed. A chant began somewhere in the crowd, then another, then hundreds. Soon the entire hall echoed with a single demand. King Aldrich, King Aldrich, King Aldrich. The sound shook the walls. Citizens joined in. Soldiers joined in. Even nobles who once despised him shouted his name. After all these years, justice had finally arrived, and the kingdom wanted its true king. Yet Aldrich remained silent. He looked neither pleased nor excited. Instead, he looked tired, deeply tired, as though 60 years of memories were passing through his mind. The betrayal, the lies, the years spent carrying burdens that should never have been his. Slowly, he stepped forward. The crowd immediately fell silent. Everyone waited. Everyone expected him to accept the crown. Anyone else would have. Anyone else would have seized the opportunity. But Aldrich was not anyone else. The old duke looked at the crown resting on the marble floor. Then he looked around the hall. At the people, the nobles, the soldiers, the kingdom. Finally, he spoke. No. The single word stunned everyone. Confused murmurs spread throughout the chamber. Had they heard correctly? No? Aldrich smiled gently. A sad smile. A peaceful smile. The throne was stolen from me. His voice echoed clearly. That much is true. He paused. But I do not want it. Shock swept through the room. The nobles stared. The citizens stared. Even Isabella stared. Aldrich continued. For 20 years, I gathered evidence against corruption. His gaze swept across the hall. I never did it for power. Another pause. I did it for justice. The crowd listened carefully. I never wanted a crown. His voice softened. I wanted a better kingdom. Tears appeared in the eyes of many who listened, because everyone knew he meant it. Every word, every sacrifice, every action throughout his life proved it. Aldrich had never pursued power. He had pursued truth. Then the Duke did something nobody expected. He turned toward Isabella. The young Duchess stood frozen. Their eyes met. The entire hall watched. Slowly, Aldrich walked toward her. The crowd parted. A path opened between them. Neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. Both remembered everything. Their first meeting, the forced marriage, the humiliation, the silver key, the villages, the attack, the hidden chamber. The countless moments that had transformed strangers into partners, partners into friends, friends into something far deeper. Aldrich stopped before her. Then he gently took her hand. The gesture felt simple, yet somehow more powerful than any royal ceremony. The hall remained silent, waiting, watching, listening. Aldrich turned toward the crowd. Then he spoke words the kingdom would never forget. A crown belongs to the person who earns the people's trust. The sentence echoed throughout the chamber. He looked back at Isabella. The people deserve someone who still dreams of the future. His voice grew softer. Someone with the courage to fight for what is right. Tears filled Isabella's eyes. Aldrich, he smiled. The same gentle smile she had come to love. Then, before anyone could react, he bent down, picked up the fallen crown, and placed it upon her head. The room exploded. Thunderous applause erupted. Cheers shook the palace. Citizens wept openly. Nobles shouted in celebration. History had changed, not through conquest, not through war, through kindness, through sacrifice, through love. Queen Isabella's coronation took place 1 month later. It became the most celebrated event in the kingdom's history, not because of luxury, not because of wealth, because of hope. For the first time in generations, the people believed their ruler truly cared about them. The young queen stood before the nation, strong, confident, wise. Beside her stood Aldrich, not as king, not as ruler, but as her husband. Her closest advisor, her greatest supporter, and perhaps the only person who never cared about power. Together, they transformed the kingdom. Corrupt officials were removed. Unjust taxes were abolished. Stolen wealth was returned to struggling communities. Schools expanded. Hospitals multiplied. Trade flourished. Crime declined. Opportunities reached villages that had been forgotten for generations. People who once lived in poverty found hope. Children who once faced hunger found security. Families who once feared the future found stability. The kingdom entered an era unlike anything it had experienced before. An era historians would later call the Golden Age. Years passed, then more years. The queen remained beloved. The people adored her. But those closest to the throne knew a secret. Whenever Isabella faced a difficult decision, she sought one person's advice first, Aldrich's. The old duke never sat on the throne, yet his wisdom shaped the kingdom. His kindness influenced every law. His sense of justice guided every reform. Many joked that Isabella ruled the kingdom, but Aldrich ruled her heart. And perhaps that was true. Their marriage became legendary, not because it began with love, because it didn't. It began with fear, with misunderstanding, with humiliation. Yet somehow, it grew into something stronger than either had imagined, something real, something lasting, something beautiful. The same people who once mocked their marriage now celebrated it. Poets wrote about them, artists painted them, children learned their story in schools. The punishment bride and the aging duke, the couple who changed a kingdom. Time, however, shows mercy to no one. Eventually, age began catching up with Aldrich. His hair grew whiter, his steps slowed. The scars of a lifetime became harder to ignore. Yet he never complained, never sought sympathy, never changed. Even in old age, he remained the same man Isabella had fallen in love with, kind, patient, selfless. One autumn evening, many years later, the royal physicians delivered news Isabella had long feared. Aldrich's health was failing. The queen spent every possible moment beside him. Just as he had once protected her, she now cared for him. Every day, every night, every moment. One evening, as the sun painted the sky gold, Aldrich reached for her hand. The same hand he had taken in the Hall of Crowns. The same hand he had never let go. You gave me a wonderful life. Tears streamed down Isabella's face. No, she shook her head. You gave one to me. Aldrich smiled. A peaceful smile. A satisfied smile. A satisfied smile. The smile of a man with no regrets. Then he closed his eyes and quietly slipped away. The kingdom mourned for months. Church bells rang throughout the realm. Thousands traveled to the capital, not to honor a king, but to honor a man who could have ruled, but chose service instead, a man who could have taken power, but chose love, a man who changed history without ever sitting on the throne. The funeral became the largest gathering the kingdom had ever witnessed. People came from every province, every village, every corner of the realm. To say goodbye, Queen Isabella never remarried. Many encouraged her to. Many suggested alliances, political marriages, practical arrangements. She refused them all. Her heart had already made its choice long ago. Instead, she focused on preserving Aldrich's legacy. Several years later, she commissioned a magnificent statue overlooking the capital. The monument stood upon a hill, visible from every corner of the city. It depicted Aldrich exactly as people remembered him. Strong, wise, kind, watching over the kingdom he had spent his life protecting. When the statue was finally completed, the queen attended its unveiling. Thousands gathered. Many expected a speech. Instead, Isabella quietly approached the base of the monument. There, engraved in stone, were simple words, words she had written herself, words that perfectly captured their story. He was given to me as a punishment. Her voice trembled. The crowd listened. He became the greatest blessing of my life. Silence followed. Then tears. Thousands of them. Because everyone understood. The words weren't merely about a marriage. They were about transformation, about seeing beyond appearances, about finding love where none was expected. And so the story of Duchess Isabella and Duke Aldrich became legend. Generations passed, yet people never forgot. Parents told the tale to their children. Teachers shared it in classrooms. Bards sang it in taverns. The story survived because it carried a truth greater than any crown, a truth greater than any kingdom. True love is not measured by age, or beauty, or status, or power. It is measured by kindness, by loyalty, by sacrifice, by choosing someone every day, even when the world tells you not to. The marriage that began as a punishment ended as the greatest love story the kingdom had ever known. And for centuries afterward, whenever people looked upon Aldrich's statue standing above the Capitol, they remembered the old duke everyone underestimated, the man who could have been king, but chose instead to become something far greater, the love of a queen's life.